Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Stop me if you've heard this one before. An esteemed and high-ranking member of the University of Michigan faculty has been caught up in a sexual scandal, and as a result, he got his walking papers. This man is, or rather was, someone who had been at the university and climbed the ranks, clawed his way to a supreme position, only to now fall from a great height. Now, the person I'm talking about is University of Michigan Provost Martin Filbert. He was fired in 2020 after multiple accusations of sexual misconduct surfaced. Filbert was the second highest administrator at that university. The accusations against him was that he engaged in multiple sexual relationships with university employees. For nearly his entire tenure as provost, he was in simultaneous sexual relationships with at least 2 university employees, sometimes more. He pressed some of these women to send him explicit photos, which he stored on his university-owned devices, and he engaged in sexual contact with them in university offices, including with one woman on a near daily basis for a time. Well, I guess he was trying to teach everybody that those hormone-fueled teenagers and 20-somethings weren't going to outdo him. The University of Michigan said that scandal involving this former provost Filbert was responsible for them coming up with their policy that prohibits most supervisor-employee relationships. So this guy got canned while Me Too was going strong. That's probably a big part of it as well. But wait a minute, maybe I'm not thinking about him. Maybe who I'm thinking about is Michigan State University, who fired their head coach, Mel Tucker, in 2023. Yeah, I know it's not the University of Michigan, but it is a university in Michigan, and he was their football coach, by the way. Now, the accusations against Tucker was that he allegedly made sexual comments and even played with himself while on a phone call with Brenda Tracy, an advocate and rape survivor. Tracy reported this alleged phone call with Tucker to the university's Title IX office, and she played the damsel in distress extra hard, saying, "The idea that someone could know me and say they understand my trauma but then reinflict that trauma on me is so disgusting to me, it's hard for me to even wrap my mind around it. It's like he sought me out just to betray me." Keep in mind, this woman Tracy said that she was the victim of a gang rape. Now, even if the accusations that she made against Tucker were true, he didn't put a hand on her, but she's talking as if he and some friends violated her. Now, you can say what you want about these accusations, but the one thing you can't say is that lewd comments over the phone by a lecherous middle-aged man is the same as rape. Tucker may have offended her, but he did not rape her. So for her to say that he re-inflicted that trauma on her is to say that he raped her. That was the inference. For his part, Tucker called Tracy's allegations completely false and said the investigation into his conduct had not been fair or unbiased. Though interestingly, he also described that phone call as an entirely mutual private event between 2 adults. That's kind of a peculiar way to describe something that he had also said was completely false, but okay. But you know what? Mel Tucker isn't even the case that I'm talking about. Obviously, what we're talking about is the Trinidadian-American coach Sherrone Moore. He's accused of having an inappropriate relationship with a staff member. This staff member had previously concealed the relationship, but when the university got a tip about it and investigated the woman's phone, that's when she broke up with Moore and confessed everything to the university. Well, apparently Moore didn't find out about it until 2 days later, because on December 10th, he allegedly went to this woman's apartment and prosecutors say barged his way in, grabbed several butter knives and a pair of scissors, and said he was going to kill himself, telling this woman that he was going to make her watch while he took his own life, that she had ruined his life and his blood was going to be on her hands. Of course, he didn't go through with it, but she did go through with calling the police. They arrested him less than an hour before the university fired him for violating the university's policy against supervisor-employee relationships. And the female staff member who first tried to conceal her affair with Moore before she finally was compelled to have to admit to it, what happened to her? Well, she gets to keep her job. That's what happened. And as for Moore, he's facing charges of 1 felony count of home invasion, 1 misdemeanor count of stalking of a domestic relationship, and 1 misdemeanor count of breaking and entering without owner's permission. And now he's awaiting his day in court. I've said it, and these silly Negroes who spend all their time around white society to the point that they think they're part of it, they just don't get it. The fastest way to bring a black man down is to show that he can't keep his pants up. And for too many of them, apparently some woman from the dominant society is the golden blackjack that never misses. Because you know what? There was another person at the University of Michigan who also got canned for violating the school's relationship policy. A guy named Mark Schlissel. And who was Mark Schlissel? He was the president of the University of Michigan. He was the guy who was running the place. He got fired in 2022 after an investigation determined that he was sending numerous emails to a subordinate where he was hitting on her every chance he got. And what's really interesting is that when they fired Schlissel, the Board of Regents posted a letter that they had sent him that said, quote, "With regard to the actions of Martin Filbert on August 3rd, 2020, you sent an email to the entire University of Michigan community writing that the highest priority for our regents and leadership team is to make our community safe for all." Ain't that something? On his way out the door, that's what they chose to rub in his face. Hey, remember that black guy, the former provost? Yeah, we got rid of him because apparently he was jumping on everything that moved on this campus. Well, this guy Schlissel didn't hesitate to crow about it, to get on his soapbox and be sanctimonious, and now they had to fire him too. Hell of a way for the university president to go. But I'll bet you didn't hear too much about University President Schlissel getting his pink slip. And speaking of people getting pink slips, Emmanuel Acho tried to go ingratiating himself with the white media by dumping on Sherrone Moore. Apparently nobody ever told this guy about how people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw bricks. We all know that Acho wasn't saying any of this criticism from a place of conviction. He was saying it because he's trying to audition for a job. This is what all these bootlicks do. They trash other black people in the hopes that some white media executive or white producer will see it and want to offer them a job to do it on TV. Well, the white people in the industry are letting Acho know that he's on the outs and he's going to stay there. They're reminding him that one of his former co-workers had said that he and Joy Taylor was sleeping around, and that no, these white colleagues in the industry, they hadn't forgotten about it. They weren't going to let this go down the memory hole. So his podcast thumbnail had the intentionally provocative title, "How Can He Be This Dumb?" Well, Emmanuel Acho ought to know, but he's just proven that sucking up to the white powers that be is the only trick he knows. And that brings me to the final point of this morning's briefing that must be discussed, and we're going to go in detail about this one. Universities pay their staff and administration very well. They should. They've got all that money that they overcharge students in tuition for. And where do your hundreds of millions of dollars go? Into the pockets of the regents and the school president, the provost and the sports teams and all that. At least for the coaching staff, they get that money. The players get nothing. When you work at a university, especially if you're in the sports program, they pay very well. Those black athletes bring in billions to these schools, and it's a huge windfall for the university. In the case of Mel Tucker, he had a 10-year fully guaranteed contract worth $95 million. That meant that he was getting $9.5 million annually. You know, there's a lot of NFL players who ride the bench and don't get that much. That's what he lost when he had that entirely mutual private event between two adults phone call. Then there was former Provost Filbert. He was getting paid $570,000 a year since at least 2017. This guy was knocking down over $500,000 for a job that most people even on the university campus couldn't tell you what the hell he was supposed to be doing. And of course, Trinidadian American Sherrone Moore was getting paid $6 million a year through the 2029 season. He had a buyout clause in his contract for over $13 million, but since he was fired for cause, the university probably won't even have to pay it. And that's what these white media outlets have been loving the most about this story, that these black men who were getting paid millions have lost it. That was the part that they wanted to see happen. That's what they considered to be so newsworthy about these stories. In fact, when CBS wrote about Sherrone Moore's contract, they mentioned that the university might not have to pay him before they even mentioned how much he was getting paid. That's not the way a logical sequence of events works. They're supposed to actually tell their readers how much he was making before they mention what the contractual limitations are. But it just goes to show what's front of mind for the white media, especially when it comes to sports. As I've always told you, the sports page is the place where these white media bigots get to spew their anti-black hatred unadulterated. That's what they love about the sports page so much. They get to sit there and say all of this blatantly racist stuff about black people, but then they hide behind what is supposed to be a flimsy veneer and claim that, well, we're talking about a coach here, or a team, or a particular player. We're not making a blanket statement about black people. This is just about sports. Now, of course, they know that everybody sees through it, and that's the point. The entire point is, yeah, we're spewing our anti-black hatred here and we're getting away with it. That's the idea. They don't want to hide what they really think. And in the case of Moore, they were so eager to tell everybody that he probably won't get paid, they went ahead and said that before they even told their readers how much he was missing out on. Doesn't matter if he goes to jail or not, they're far more interested in seeing a black man lose his money than they are in him losing his freedom. Why do you think the white media was so eager to pat themselves on the back about Michael Jackson? Because for a while they thought he had lost all of his money. They were wrong, of course, but for them, that was supposed to be the real victory. You look at what happened to Mike Tyson and Floyd Mayweather. Both of them went to prison, but their incarceration wasn't the end of their careers. In the case of Mike Tyson, he got out of prison and he immediately went back to making millions. And as for Floyd Mayweather, he just got richer and richer and richer. What they want is to be able to say that they clawed all that money back out of those black men's bank accounts and left them with nothing. That's supposed to be the real victory. That's the entire point of making these black men into these high-profile examples. But understand, I only say that in regards to how the white media tries to use these individuals as proxies for the black community. When it comes to the Martin Filberts and the Mel Tuckers and the Sherrone Moores, there's a lot of things we can say about them, but the one thing nobody can say is that these men are victims. They were not victimized. These guys chased after exactly what they wanted, and this was the predictable result. It just goes to show there's a ton of people who spend all of their time on university campuses, and yet they're plumb dumb. What could possibly be more important to these men than their money? See, it's the same mental disease that these black athletes and entertainers suffer from. Their desire, their overarching obsession, is to be in the dominant society's circles, or in bed with someone from the dominant society. That's more important to them than whatever money they're getting paid. These universities tell them no fraternizing with people on campus and certainly not your coworkers, and that also extends to guests as well. And yet these guys decided, well, maybe it doesn't. We gotta be honest about it, black men who are in sports, or at least in the orbit of it, they tend to have a reputation for not being very bright. I'm not saying that it should be that way, but I am saying the reason these guys become targets is because sports is one of the few places where the playing field is level and hence black competitors dominate. But also because these guys have skanks trying to get at them since they were in middle school. And while it's true that the majority of black athletes are married to black women and would never even consider someone from the dominant society, it's also true that from Jack Johnson to Sherrone Moore, white power has long known there's a number of black men who would. Strength is not just an excess of power, it's also an absence of weakness. These guys who apparently have a weakness for blondes, and they always wind up putting themselves in the trick bag, and it's not like these men are single. Mel Tucker had a wife. She divorced him. Martin Filbert was also married at the time that he had his university scandal. In fact, in the university's report that they wrote about him, they specifically mentioned his wife, not by name, but they referenced her, and they referred to him being concerned that his wife was growing suspicious of all the texting he was doing with these women he was shacking up with at the university. And of course, everybody knows that the Trinidadian American Sherrone Moore is married to a white woman, and he has children by her. So apparently one white woman wasn't enough for this guy. By the way, remember how in yesterday's briefing I showed you how Robin Roberts tried to racially pathologize the Diddy trial by saying, "You think that hip-hop culture is on trial too?" Of course, hip-hop culture being a euphemism for black culture. And I told you that when it comes to these predominantly white arenas, the movies, government, schools, etc., which is everything except hip-hop, Robin Roberts and her ilk never racially pathologized those scandals. She and her pals never point to them and ask, "Do you think that university culture is on trial?" They never do that stuff. But things like this are precisely the reason why so many black men who are in these arenas, especially if they happen to be sports related, they're looked at as not being very smart because they keep falling for the same trick bag over and over again when it's blatantly obvious what's happening. Hell, they put themselves in the trick bag. They just jump right in and then tie the thing off. It doesn't matter if it's the jock or the provost of the university, which truth be told is one of those esoteric titles that's so unique it sounds more prestigious than dean of the school. No matter where they are, it always works out the same way. All these guys are looking for approval, ultimately. They're addicted to it. And that approval matters to them more than their reputations, more than their careers, more than their marriages, more than their children, more than their own futures. When it comes to black people, white power believes in doing brain typing. They try to make sure they know what kind of individual they're dealing with. And in the case of these Negroes in politics and academics in particular, they're right a lot more often than not. But this latest incident with Sherrone Moore, it just goes to show universities may be billed as institutions of higher learning, but when your entire reason for going there is to get approval from the dominant society, the only thing you're going to major in is how to suffer. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Mouse, Wally Bilal, Terry Freeney, Kenneth Prescia, and Samora Morris. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.